My name is Tom Gerard. I am the interviewer and a volunteer with the Biddeford Cultural and Heritage Center. It is Friday, February 10th, 2023. Today I have the privilege of interviewing Lloyd LaFountain III. We are conducting this interview at my home in Kennebunk. So Lloyd, we're going to start the very, very beginning of your life. When and where were you born?
I was born on April 23rd, 1962 at Mercy Hospital in Portland, and my family at the time was living in an apartment in Old Orchard, but subsequently 2 months later we moved to Biddeford.
Okay, so Mercy instead of Weber Hospital.
Correct.
Okay. And what, if any, story that you recall of how your family ended up in Biddeford?
Well, my father was born and raised in Biddeford. He then went off to college and law school in the Marines, had married my wife, was living in North Carolina while he was in the Marines, but when he got out, he eventually came back to Sanford to practice law, and then moved back to a practice in Biddeford, and at that time he briefly lived in an Old Orchard in an apartment, but he's born and raised in the area. My mother is not. My mother is from Monongahela, Pennsylvania.
So she's an immigrant.
She is. She is. They actually met when my father was visiting his cousin, Dorothy Corriveau, who was a flight attendant for Eastern Airlines. He went to visit her in New York City, on Long Island, where she was stationed out of, I guess, LaGuardia. And my mother was an airline flight attendant for Easton and was a roommate of Dorothy. So when my father went to visit Dorothy, that's where he met my mother.
And how did they decide to come to Biddeford versus going to Pennsylvania?
I think he always just wanted to come back to Biddeford, which is where he was from.
Yeah.
And I think as you know, when you're starting out in law practice, you obviously want to go where you know people because that's where your potential clients are from.
And did your father have any siblings at all?
My father has one sibling, Elizabeth Regan. She was, she was born in probably 28 maybe. My father was born in 1931. My father graduated from Biddeford High School in class of 1949. And Aunt Betty was probably 1946.
And did she live locally?
She lived in Kennebunk.
Okay.
Yes, she had married Tom Regan, who was an attorney here in Kennebunk, and they raised 5 children here.
Okay. And now your father, he was kind of a storied athlete also at Biddeford High School, wasn't he?
Yes, he played football and basketball for Biddeford High School, and used to tell us stories about being coached by Warner Keeney, and I think at that time the athletic director was Steve White. So, he would share a lot of stories with us about his basketball and football career at Biddeford High.
Now, I think he graduated the same year as Bob Cody, the teacher and coach from St. Louis and Thornton Academy. So they must have been somewhat athletic rivals in high school. Did he tell any stories about St. Louis and Biddeford?
Oh, definitely with St. Louis. My father's best friend growing up and his lifelong friend was a gentleman named Guy Havey. Or Guy Heavey. My father lived on Graham Street, and Guy Heavey lived on Union Street, and they grew up as childhood friends. Guy then went on to St. Louis, and he was a class of 48 grad, so he was 1 year ahead of my dad, but they were best friends growing up, and they were rivals on the football field.
Now, I think Biddeford, maybe your father's junior year, won the state championship in football. Does that ring a bell with you at all?
I don't recall that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And now, when your father came back, he was an attorney. And did your mom, was she a stay-at-home mom?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she only went to work after, I think, her children, so there were 4 of us, were out of high school. Then she went to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have a grandmother that has an interesting story. Can you share that with us?
Sure. My grandmother was Teresa Genevieve Doyle, who then became Teresa Doyle LaFountain. She was born in 1894 in Biddeford, and she grew up living in the Summer Street block, which is still there today. It's the yellow building right across the street from Alex Pizza. It's a big yellow tenement building. There were probably 4 or 5 front doors. And she grew up there with what I believe might have been, I think there were 8 Doyle children who lived there. My grandmother graduated from Biddeford High School in 1913. And she wanted to be a doctor, but her family discouraged her from becoming a medical doctor. So instead, she decided to go to dental school. So my grandmother graduated from dental school from Tufts University Dental in 1917. And when I tell that to people, they say, wow, that's pretty interesting. I mean, she must have been the only female. And she's actually not. I've seen her yearbook before, and there were 4 or 5 women in her graduating class. She then, after graduating, came back to Maine, and her first job as a dentist was working in Patten, Maine, which is, I think, I don't know if that's Aroostook County. I think it's sort of the start of Aroostook County. And she worked basically in a lumberjack camp, and she was basically there to extract the teeth of lumberjacks who apparently had poor dental hygiene. And then later on, she came back to the Biddeford area and opened up her practice, and she ran it for a number of years. In fact, she was my dentist until I probably hit junior high school.
Now,
and then she fully retired.
Was she in sole practice?
She was always in a sole practice. I think most, if not all, dentists had their own practices. There weren't any sort of practices with 2 or 3 dentists like you see now with several hygienists.
And where was her practice located?
At one time, it was on the in the building that is on the corner of Alfred and Maine, which used to be the Puritan restaurant, which is now a Chinese restaurant. And the name escapes
Happy
me.
Dragon.
Happy Dragon. So it was upstairs somewhere in that building. And then later on, for the last several years of her practice, she actually ran it from her home, which was a house on Alfred Street, just shy of 5 Points.
Okay. So she lived on Alfred, just going toward downtown Biddeford.
Yes,
as you leave 5 Points.
As you leave 5 Points, she lived what? Okay, it's interesting because a lot of things that I may describe during the course of this, she lived what was probably the 3rd house from 5 Points on your left. It's down to 2 houses because something has taken it over. Likewise, I grew up later on Alfred Street. I always would tell people I live 8 houses after Poli's. It's now 6 houses because parking lots and then Starbucks was built. So, but she lived actually across the street from Raoul Parody and Charlotte Parody.
Yeah, Charlotte's my godmother. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
yes.
Raoul just died.
I just saw that. Yes, well, those were my parents' neighbors across the street. So later on in life, I actually, when she went into a nursing home, she asked me to house sit for her, and I did. And then after she passed away, I bought the house, and that's where Tricia, my wife, and I raised our children for the first 2.5, 3 years of our marriage. So that was her home. And what was interesting is one of the rooms, the front, there were 2 living rooms. One of the small living rooms was had a large water stain on the floor. And that was from the dental chair. Because back then, when you had to spit, you leaned over to your left and there was that water thing. And there might have been a water leak. And also there was, in the wall, there was a large outlet that you could not plug anything into it that was normal because it actually was the socket for an X-ray machine. So it had a much larger piece to plug in. But that's where her dental practice was. And that's where my children were raised for the first 2 or 3 years of their lives.
Wow. So I'll circle back to your wife and your children.
Sure.
A little later, but can you talk about some of your childhood experiences and memories of growing up in Biddeford and what it was like for you? You're probably one of the younger people we have interviewed for Voices, so it'll be interesting to see, what your memories are.
Well, as I told you, I moved to Union Street. It was 39 Union Street when I was 2 months old. We were there for a number of years until I was probably halfway through my 3rd grade. But back then, you had what was called Wentworth Street School, which is a two-story brick building on the lower half of Wentworth Street. And that was a kindergarten downstairs and a first grade upstairs. So that was my first school building. Kids who went to Wentworth Street School tended to be from either Union Street, Lower Graham, Bradbury Street, State Street, maybe Lower Elm Street. So that's where we attended. In the morning was kindergarten was 2 sessions. There was a morning and an afternoon, and I remember I always walked to school. There was no one got bused to Wentworth Street School. I would walk, and I would imagine one of my parents probably walked with me when I was in kindergarten, but in first grade I was on my own. I actually walked to school, and as I said, it was a 2-room schoolhouse, so there was no cafeteria. You went home for lunch. So they would release us probably, I would guess, somewhere around 11:30, and we would have an hour off, so we all walked to our individual homes, had lunch, and then came back afterwards. So that was sort of a unique experience. Then later on, that school became kindergarten and then special education, and then eventually it was just special education, and now I think it's a building that's apartments.
Yeah, still standing.
Still standing, still standing. Yeah. But that was my first school. And then probably halfway through my 3rd grade, my family moved up to Alfred Street, what was called Alfred Road. Once you hit 5 Points, heading towards the Biddeford Turnpike exit, it went from Alfred Street to Alfred Road. Now it's all called Alfred Street, but it's still Route 111. But 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade was Kennedy School. And then later on, actually through 6th grade, and then 7th and 8th was at what was called Biddeford Junior High School.
Is that the one on Alfred Street?
Yes, that's now the community center, the Richard Martin Community Center. Yeah. But that's where my grandmother, who graduated in 1913, went to high school. Yeah. And that's where my father, who graduated in class of 49, went to high school. And I went there for what was called junior high school. It wasn't called middle school back then. It was considered junior high school.
And then to Biddeford High School? And
then to Biddeford High School, entering there in the fall of 76, graduating in 1980.
And were you an active student in high school?
I was pretty active. I sports-wise, I ran on the cross-country team. I was not a very good runner, to say the least. My running days actually got a lot better after I graduated from high school and doing some more recreational running in college and then beyond. But in high school, I also participated in student council. I was on the speech and debate team. I competed for 4 years. I was state championship in original oratory my senior year. And I was involved in a few other activities. High school band was one of them. And that was interesting because my freshman year, we played in the fall at a political rally, which is interesting that a high school band would be playing at a political rally. You probably wouldn't do that now. But it was a political rally for Jimmy Carter, who was this gentleman from Georgia who was probably former governor, or maybe he was the current governor, who was running for president for as a Democrat, and he won. So then in January, after the election, Biddeford High School's band was invited to Washington to march in the inaugural parade. So I got to march in Jimmy Carter's inaugural parade, which was a fascinating experience.
I would think. Yeah.
It was.
Now, did your parents get a chance to go and observe that with you? Or?
No, they did not go. But my sister was there because she was 2 years ahead of me, and she played clarinet. I played trumpet. And we sent down a band of about 110 people, which included people who played instruments, majorettes, and color guards.
Yeah. Any standout memories besides marching, or?
Oh, at that event?
Yeah.
We all sort of joke about what we may have sounded like when we passed the viewing stand that Jimmy Carter was seated in, because most of us pulled the instruments away from our mouths to look to our left to see him. So we're wondering if row by row the music sort of stopped, because we were all looking at him. And apparently we were one of only 2 bands that he actually stood up and waved to. Yeah. He probably remembered that we had played for him back in probably October the year prior for his political rally.
Wow.
So that was a fascinating experience.
So when I was in high school in the late 60s, Thornton, Biddeford, St. Louis, they all had really spiffy marching band uniforms. Did you still have that in the late 70s?
We probably had the same uniforms that they were wearing in the 60s.
Yeah.
But we had a wonderful band director, Paul Phelan. He was originally from Calais, and he was at Biddeford High School for a number of years. And the guy was just so energetic. And from what I understand, the night before we actually marched in Washington, he was out there on the road walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, basically figuring out how people need to pivot, to step, to turn the corners that we were going on. So, the guy really put in a lot of effort, and the band was very well accomplished under him.
Well, it sounds like quite an experience, Lloyd. When you were growing up, what do you remember about, TV programs you watched or radio that you listened to or things of that nature? What activities outside of school, fun activities did you participate in?
Well, Friday nights in the wintertime were always very special because it started out with my parents driving us to St. Louis Field and dropping us off so we could go ice skating. Back then, Biddeford had 2 outdoor skating facilities. One was St. Louis, which is on the corner of Hill and West Street. And there's no natural water there. That was literally volunteers from the St. Louis alumni group flooding the field and maintaining an ice rink. The second one was called Westbrook Skating Rink. That's still there, and it was in operation last year. I don't know if it is now. It's driven by fundraising, but we would be dropped off at St. Louis, and then we would be picked up probably by 7:30, 7:45, just in time to get home for 8 o'clock to watch the Brady Bunch, and 8:30 to watch the Partridge Family.
Now, were you on speed skates or hockey skates?
I was on hockey skates early on, but I was not very good, and later on I was on speed skates, but I was not very good there either. But I still own the same pair of speed skates that I had when I was young.
Yeah, that's before Biddeford fully transitioned from speed to hockey.
Yeah. Oh, I guess
Yeah.
a generation before me were very active speed skater organizations in the city. A lot of those social clubs.
Yeah, there is Dan Gagne who, from the 50s and 60s, he led one of the speed skating clubs. He is one of the interviews that, if you get a chance, you might want to listen to it. It's really interesting what went on back then.
Yeah, I know Dan. Yes.
Yeah. So he was very wrapped up in that. And what about downtown Biddeford? What was downtown Biddeford like when you were growing up and through high school?
It was active, not as active as it had been years prior. I've seen the photographs of people coming out of the mills, and the streets were just mobbed with people, lunchtime and after work. It was a busy area. I mean, a lot of the businesses that I remember are long gone. Murphy's Music Store, located near City Hall, was one of them. Langevin's clothing store was pretty much next door to that, is gone. Euland's, a jewelry store, is now, and I think they might have done clothing, is now gone. Woolworth's downtown. Polakowicz was a men's clothing store, which is no longer there. But it was a pretty active area. There was no such thing as 5 Point Shopping Center. That didn't come in until, I think, 1973.
I think you're right.
So I know I'm right on that one, because my parents bought their house in 72, and then they were sort of up in arms because we thought it was going to be a quiet area, and then the shopping plaza came. So it sort of changed the
I think
traffic.
back then a lot of people thought it was going to go up Elm Street versus going up Alfred. But I think the hospital relocating changed some of that.
Yeah, the other plaza was there already, which is where Martin's is now. That used to be Giant, I think.
Yeah.
Was that? And I think First National might have been there. Oh, Hannaford was there at one time. Then they moved into where First National is. Yeah.
And what about restaurants? Did you go out to eat much as a family?
Going out to eat was sort of a maybe once a month thing, and oftentimes it would take place in the Portland area, and that's because my father was the U.S. Attorney from Maine, and his office was in Portland, so we would go up to meet him, and we tended to go to the Sportsman's Grill, which was a big spaghetti place which was no longer there. But in coming to this interview, I was thinking about restaurants in Biddeford, and I never really thought about it until just today when I was thinking that there was a heavy Greek influence in Biddeford when it came to food. I mean, the places that we would go to were Alex Pizza, which is the Mantis family, the Colonial Hut, which is the Antonakis family, the Wonder Bar, which is the Dragitas family, the Palace Diner, which is the Muzas family. So a lot of the most popular restaurants in Biddeford at that time were of Greek heritage.
That's true. That is true. And what about outside play? Did you hang around Mayfield and Rotary Park or any of those places?
Yes,
when you were a kid?
you did not really play indoors unless it was inclement weather. So when we lived up on Alfred Road, which is between Five Points and May Street, I used to spend pretty much all day at Mayfield. You'd basically go in the morning, come home at lunch, go in the afternoon, and then you might go at the evening. I did go away to summer camp during the month of July, so that was pretty much June and August that I would be down at Mayfield.
And where did you do summer camp?
I did summer camp at the Maine State YMCA camp in Winthrop on Lake Copacequani. And I had the unique experience of going after my fourth grade summer and fifth grade summer, it was an all-boys camp. And then the following 3 years, it had gone co-ed. So I went to a boys camp for 2 years, and then the camp was co-ed for 3 of the years. And then later on, I served on the board of directors, and I'm still pretty active in volunteering at that camp. It's only about 4 or 5 miles from my home.
And was that a positive experience for you as a kid?
Oh, it was a wonderful experience. Yeah. It was. My sisters grew up going to Camp Laughing Loon, which is on Little Ossipee in East Waterboro. And at that time, it was an overnight camp. Now it's a day camp run by the YWCA.
Yeah. And before we went online, we were talking about the City Theater downtown. Was that still a movie theater when you were growing up? And was the Central Theater still operating when you grew up?
I remember going once with my father, not to see a movie, but probably to talk to Mr. Murphy, who was the manager of the theater. I don't recall ever watching a movie go at that time. And then for years it was closed. And it wasn't until later on that they did some renovations of it and it became more active at the theater.
Yeah, and what about the Central Theater? Do you recall that at all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Across, which is now the police station?
Yeah.
Yes. We used to go to the Central Theater or would go to the Mutual Theater over in Saco.
Yeah.
These are one screen theaters. So if a movie was around for 3 weeks, you didn't get a choice to see something. You had to see the same movie twice. You couldn't go to a different screen and see something else. But yes, I remember going there, and I remember seeing Dr. Dolittle. And I remember in first grade I had a broken leg, so I had to sit on the aisle so I could stick my foot out because I was in a huge cast.
Yeah.
But those are the two movies I remember.
Okay. So it doesn't sound like you had a big family, outreach family or anything. Did you do bigger family activities with aunts, uncles on either side of the family or anything of that nature?
Well, on my father's side, it was strictly his mother, and which is my grandmother, and my Aunt Betty, who lived here. We would get together occasionally for family events, but my grandmother liked to go to Kennebunk Beach, and my aunt, who lived in Kennebunk, would go to Kennebunk Beach for the day also. So we would tend to come over to Kennebunk Beach to spend the day. On my mother's side, she's from Pennsylvania. Her siblings, the closest one was in North Dartmouth, Massachusetts. Others were Connecticut and Pennsylvania. So we didn't see them as often. So we didn't have those big family get-togethers.
Yeah.
Later on we did when people started to get married. We'd be invited to weddings, but...
Yeah. And do you know at all about the LaFountain heritage, if that's from Canada or from abroad or where your ancestors came from?
Yeah, my last name is LaFountain, which is a French name, but through Ancestry.com and through my own research, I have very little French heritage. My great-grandfather LaFountain married a woman named Lillian McCarn, and she was born on Prince Edward Island, but I think she is of Scottish descent. So I don't really know much about the LaFountain name and where they came from. I know at one point they were in Bakersfield, Vermont, probably coming from Canada, but I don't know other than that. I do know from ancestry that I am 45% Irish, 30% English, and Northwestern European, which would be Belgium and France. And then I have about 18% Scottish. So I really consider myself to be 3/4 Irish. I'm a descendant of a LaFountain, a Doyle, which is Irish, a Hughes, which is Irish, and a Fian, which is Irish. So,
And your family belonged to St. Mary's Parish?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And were your parents active in the parish?
They were active. I think my mother belonged to the Sodality Club, which was a group of women who did charitable fundraising, probably for the church and for outside causes. And my father may have served on the parish council at one time or another.
Yeah.
So,
Were you active at all in St. Mary's?
I was active as an altar boy.
As an altar boy?
Yes, I served as an altar boy when I was younger. The altar boys, the large group of altar boys came from St. Mary's School, and the rest of us came from public school. And the one thing I resented that during school vacation week, it was always the public school kids who had to serve the daily mass, because the parochial St. Mary's kids did it throughout the rest of the year during the school, because they'd go to mass and then go to school. But we, during our vacation week, would have to go and do it. But that was a wonderful experience. I remember my earliest memory is of Father Enright and Father Maurice Goen and Father James Martell. I used to love serving under Father Goen, because he would always, before or after Mass, he would tell the two altar boys stories, usually of a biblical nature, but they were always very interesting to listen to him. He was an older man, and he was just fascinating to serve under.
Very bright man.
Bright man.
He was a star athlete at Chever's High School.
Was he really? Yeah, I always remember that, and I can't remember the name of the prayer, but after you, after the holy, 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 and then you kneel, he'd always go prayer number 1, because that's the one that mentions Ignatius, Linus, the list of all these saints that are very obscure to people, but that's where you would hear him when he would do I don't know what that prayer is called.
No, I don't either. And I was an altar boy.
Yeah.
Because when I was an altar boy, everything was in Latin.
Okay.
You still would pronounce those names, but no, I can't.
Yeah, I served mostly with Harry Center, and Harry is he's now a local attorney in Biddeford, but we were sort of paired up a lot for serving at masses. Yeah, and I think your own brother may have been an altar boy, Patrick.
I don't know if he was or not.
Yeah.
I was. My older brother wasn't,
Yeah.
who ended up being a priest. That's ironic.
Yeah,
I can't remember if Patrick was an altar boy or not. No. But,
yeah. It was sad to see St. Mary's close.
yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that, but I mean, as they closed and formed one school, what were your thoughts about that at that time? Yeah.
Well, it was sad to see, all the schools were hemorrhaging when it came to 7th and 8th grade, and in particular St. Mary's. I think they did away with their 8th grade, then they did away with their 7th grade. So then finally they made the decision, along with the other two schools, St. Joseph's and St. Andrews, to sort of merge and create St. James. But the public schools, had better facilities and offered more programming. So it was sort of a sad outcome, but it was probably for the best that the three merged together.
And when you were in grammar school, did you have to go to a religious class once a week at St. Mary's?
Yes, it was. It used to be Saturday morning, but then it changed, and you could either choose the Saturday session or the Monday afternoon. So I think we went to the Monday afternoon session, and I probably did that through confirmation, which when I was growing up, you didn't make your confirmation until 6th grade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
We made it much earlier. Did you resent that, having to go to those classes?
No, I didn't. I always had good instructors.
Yeah.
So it was a good experience.
Yeah, good. And I know you're too young to remember the closing of St. Louis, but did your dad or people you know ever talk about that with you at all? Or
I remember the closing of St. Louis
Okay.
because I remember living on Union Street, and on Friday nights the St. Louis band would march by Graham and Union on their way up to the athletic field for a football game. So we used to be out on the corner watching St. Louis. But my sister would have been impacted by the closure of St. Louis because she entered her freshman year the year the St. Louis kids came over. So she was part of the double sessions. So being a freshman, she went to school in the afternoon. I remember that.
Yeah.
So for 2 years, she went to school in the afternoon, and then by her junior year, she could go full day because the addition had been built onto Biddeford High School.
Yeah. So, what were your general impressions of Biddeford as a community when you were growing up? And I'll leap to the follow-up question to that. And what are they now? I mean, how did you see Biddeford then through the eyes of a youngster and a young man, and compared to what you see going on now in Biddeford?
Well, growing up, you think your world is it. You don't really see sort of what goes on beyond the borders. But I think it was a very good place to grow up. Biddeford has a lot of attributes that make it a great place. Made it a great place to live. I mean, one thing Biddeford has historically done is maintained its public park system. I mean, you had Mayfield. Later on, you had the city dump, which was, I don't know what we called it then, but it became Rotary Park later on.
It's the city dump.
City dump, yeah. And then the stretch of land between South and Maine, which is now Doran Field, that was just a big mud pit, and they would put trash there also. But they developed that land to use for recreational purposes. Clifford Park, wonderful place. When I was in 7th and 8th grade, I ran cross country for Biddeford Junior High School. Those were our training ground. Those places, and then you have the beaches at Biddeford Pool and Middle Beach and Fortunes. When I was growing up, and I thought about this last night because my wife asked me, "Did you go to the beach in Biddeford often?" And I said, "No, we tended to go to Kennybunk, or we would go to Old Orchard." This is with my mother or father, and we didn't go to. I said we never went to the bathhouse, and she said why? And I said, well, the bathhouse didn't exist. It was a private beach club. So we did not go down there at all. I just remember this kind of long white building that was sort of individual bathhouse units, but you just didn't go down there. But the city, probably one of the wisest moves is they exercised the right of eminent domain and took that for public purposes and created a public beach.
That was under Mayor Bushy, wasn't it?
That was Mayor Bushy, yes.
Yeah. I mean, many people didn't think they would be successful with that, but they were.
Well, you're always successful. A municipality is, for the most part, always successful with eminent domain. It just becomes the question of the purchase price. So if the city wants to take the property by eminent domain, they're taking it. They then might get sued because the price they offered for the land is substantially less than what it's worth. And that probably did go to a lawsuit, I would imagine. But they got it, which is great. It's a great opportunity for people from Biddeford to be able to use that section of the beach because parking's at a premium at Middle Beach and at Fortunes Rocks.
And what about the incinerator when that came in? What were your thoughts about that?
I don't really remember thinking much about it when it came in. I was probably away. I might have been in college. I don't think it was there when I was in high school, but certainly it was a deterrent to downtown. We had our law practice on Main Street, and there were days that you'd come out of work and you could actually smell it. So it wasn't a very attractive thing to have located in your downtown. I know it was probably a cost-effective way to get rid of your trash, but I think having it where it's located really impacted the way Biddeford could develop as a city going forward. And obviously you've seen the Merck is gone. The smokestack is still there, but I understand it's used solely for the purposes of electronic communications like a cell tower. And we've seen what's happened with the mill development and the businesses thriving to Main Street. So that really was a roadblock to the city moving forward.
And I know you don't live locally anymore, but what about Biddeford now? What are your impressions today of downtown Biddeford?
Oh, it has certainly improved. You have very few vacant storefronts. it's getting to be known as a food city. I have a son who lives here who's actually on the Biddeford City Council now, and we'll come down on occasion for dinner, and we tend not to go to the same place twice because you don't have to. You can always experience something new in downtown Biddeford. What concerns me about Biddeford right now is the cost of affordable housing. To buy a home, really expensive. If you didn't get in before COVID, it's hard to buy something now, especially with the prices, number one, and number two, the interest rates. And likewise, I see apparently the apartment rentals are going up in price too.
And so when you left Biddeford High School, you chose to go to Holy Cross. And how did you go about making that decision as to where you were going to do post-high school education?
I had an uncle who went to Holy Cross, and I, whenever traveling south, if we were going to visit relatives or going on a family trip, you go right by Holy Cross on Highway 290, which goes through the city of Worcester, and you look to your left, and the school's up on the hill, and the football stadium's right on your left, right there near the highway. And I was always just sort of amazed by it. And then fell in love with it when I went for a tour during my fall of my freshman year, senior year of high school, excuse me.
And that was a positive experience?
Yes, very. I enjoyed myself very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when you left school, did you come right back to Biddeford?
No, I ended up going to Boston and going to law school at Suffolk University Law School in downtown Boston, which was at the time behind the State House. Now it's moved across Tremont Street on the other side of the State House. So I didn't come back to Maine until '87.
Okay, when you left law school.
When I left law school.
Did you go into practice with your dad right away?
I went into practice with my dad in 1988.
Yeah.
And practiced with him through 2005, when I left the practice of law to take a position in state government.
Was that a hard decision?
Not really. I think my father was semi-retired at that time, and I was looking for a different challenge. And I ended up going to head, and I still had an agency. It's known as the Maine Bureau of Financial Institutions, where the regulators of state banks and state chartered credit unions. When I was in the legislature, I was the chairperson of a committee that oversaw the Bureau of Financial Institutions. So I had some working knowledge as to what they did, what their mission was, and how it operated. And so it was sort of a natural fit after I left state government as a legislator to take on that role as superintendent.
And how was the experience working with your dad for that long?
Oh, I think it's like being in any family business. Yeah. It what they say, it has its moments.
Yeah.
It had its moments, but overall it was a very good experience. My father was a well-respected attorney, had a good client base, had a wide range of types of cases, and so it was a good experience working with him. Although we each sort of did our own thing, but overall it went pretty well.
And was your practice on Main Street?
Our practice, when I started with my dad, would have been across the street from the MacArthur Library.
Okay.
And here I'm sort of dating myself, up above Jonesy's restaurant.
Sure.
No longer there, but it was upstairs from Jonesy's. Then we moved across the street and down a little bit to an office on the second floor up above, and I'm dating myself, Euland's. No longer there. And then we moved later on Elm Street on the second floor of a building that Dr. Mark Mallon had his chiropractic office, which is sort of just beyond where Dairy Joy is now.
Yeah. So what was your most challenging experience in being a lawyer, in a family practice with your dad?
Types of cases, you mean?
Yeah, just an experience that you found very challenging.
Oh, I sometimes, practicing criminal law, I really resented the fact that I would worry about my client more than they worried about themselves. And that was extremely frustrating. For instance, if I was given an offer by a DA that included some sort of jail time, I would sort of hem and haw and like, oh, I don't really want to convey this to the client. This is the best we're going to get offered to us unless we go to trial. I sort of would lose sleep over it, and then you'd express the offer to your client, and their reaction would be, "Oh, okay, that's fine. I thought I'd have to do more time." And I'm thinking, well, why was I so worried about it when you weren't worried about it at all? That I really resented.
Okay.
So.
It's interesting. One thing I didn't ask you about, but I do want to ask you about, are summer jobs. And because I know you had one really interesting one, but I'll let you identify that.
Well, I don't know
what did you do for summer jobs?
Okay, I don't know what the interesting one was, but the first summer job I had was after my freshman year in high school. I worked at Bill's Pizza in Old Orchard, and I worked the day shift, which basically meant I would show up at probably 10:30 to fire up the pizza ovens, and we opened took the boards off at 11 and opened up, and my day probably wrapped up sometime around 4 or 5 o'clock, and I would ride the shuttle bus from the Five Points area down to Old Orchard every day, because the shuttle bus operated during the daytime hours. Then my next summer, I continued to work at Bill's Pizza, but now I worked evenings, and I worked from 5 until close. And close is usually 15 minutes after 1 a.m. And you stayed open till after 1 because the bars let out at 1 o'clock, and people would flock to get their slice of pizza before they drove home. That was a totally different experience from working the day shift. I grew up going to Old Orchard Beach with my family. We'd go to the beach, but then we'd go downtown twice a summer for the evening to go on the rides, get a slice of Bill's Pizza or Kay's fried dough, walk on the pier French fries, but then we'd be home by 9 o'clock at night. But I found that Old Orchard, after 9 o'clock, the families disappear, and it becomes a totally different element. And then sometimes it could get very rowdy, especially at 1 in the morning when the bars let out. So it was a unique experience. And at that time, that second summer, I worked with Ann Cosgrove, whose uncle actually owned Bill's Pizza. It was fun working with her. But as I said, it was a totally different experience from my first year. The next year, between junior and senior year in high school, I didn't want to work late at night, and so I got a job working at Burger King in Saco. And that actually was a great experience too. I didn't get a lot of hours, but it was a great experience because everyone who worked there, for the most part, was either a Biddeford High School, Thornton Academy, or Old Orchard Beach High School student. So I got to know a lot of kids who actually lived in the area, and some of them I still see till this day, and we can have a conversation about our time working at BK back in 1978, probably 79. Then after I graduated from high school, graduated on a Sunday, the following day I had a report to work at 6 a.m. at the Maine Turnpike, where I worked for 7 summers as a toll collector, starting out in Wells for a summer. I did 2 summers in Saco, 3 summers in New York, and then I think my final summer I did in Biddeford, if that adds up.
That's the one I thought was an interesting job.
Oh, it was. It was.
I mean, you must have some incidents that stick out in your mind collecting tolls of.
Oh yeah, it was.
That would happen.
It was a very interesting experience. I really enjoyed it. One of the best things at the time about working for the Turnpike is on holidays, and you have 2 holidays during the course of a summer. You have July 4th, and then you have Labor Day. It pays triple time. So I would, when I was in college, I would leave for college in late August, but I would come home to work Labor Day weekend, because just working that one day, Labor Day, it would pay for my books for the entire semester. So that was a good experience. But you meet a lot of interesting people traveling on the highway, people who forget their wallets, people who are half naked, people who lose their tickets. Now I'm dating myself again, but the Maine Turnpike was a ticket system. When you got on, you picked up a ticket from a person. It didn't dispense out like a parking garage will, where you press the button and it comes out. It was a live being handed you a ticket, and you were expected to maintain that ticket until you went to get off. And in the course of traveling 20 miles, they lose the ticket. So then you have to sort of charge them the full fare, which was York to Augusta, due to a lost ticket.
What would you do with somebody that didn't have any money?
You'd have to tell them to pull to the side and they would have to come back to you with their license, and they'd have to fill out a form, and then I think we gave them an envelope and said, please submit 60 cents or whatever it might be in this envelope. Now, whether or not the Turnpike ever collected it, I have no idea. I have no idea.
But that must have been a very busy job at the York Plaza, because, I mean, you're dealing with every car that comes through. Somebody is dealing with it versus the way it is today.
Yeah, it was the lines could get backed up on a Sunday afternoon when the people are leaving the coastline or the mountains regions in Maine, heading south to New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, New York. The traffic could get backed up on a Sunday several miles. And what would be a real glitch when traffic was backed up is when we had a certain individual who would be traveling south from the Wells exit to go through the toll booth, and you had to hold your traffic because George Bush, who was the vice president, his motorcade was coming through. So you'd have a couple miles of traffic backed up, but then you'd have to hold for 5 minutes before he came and 5 minutes after he left, so that cars aren't chasing his motorcade. And his motorcade would drive through. And one time I held a guy at the toll plaza. I said, "Sir, you'll have to wait a couple of minutes. I can't let you through." And then the motorcade sped through to the driver's right. And he looked at me and he said, "What was that?" And I said, "That was the vice president." And he said, "Of what?" And I thought, okay. That was sort of a unique comment. Oh, and then people used to think it was really funny to give you 60 pennies for their 60-cent fare, or they would give you hot money that had been sitting on their dashboard in a little dish. So when they would hand it to you, it'd be really hot. But there was a way to get back at them, because he would say, "Sir, I have to count out every penny," and they had to wait. Didn't happen often, but on occasion.
Okay, so let's go to your family now. And how did you meet your wife? Where and how?
My wife is Tricia Hitz, now Tricia Hitz LaFountain, and she's from Lincoln, Nebraska. And I met her because, well, I'll tell you how I met her in a minute, but I'll tell you what brought her initially to Maine. She had a roommate in Lincoln when she was in college, who had a cousin who ran a restaurant business in Ogunquit, Perkins Cove area. And the cousin was supposed to come to Maine to nanny for the family so the parents could work in the restaurant. And her roommate decided, "I don't really want to go." And my wife, Tricia, said, "I'll go." So she came to Maine for a summer and worked for this family. And then she came out the following year and worked for them, and then eventually stayed and started to go to USM. She had transferred from other schools. And so she was here in Maine. She then went to work for the DA's office, the district attorney's office. She was a victim witness advocate. And I met her in court because I was representing a man who was accused of assaulting his ex-wife. And she was assisting the ex-wife.
It sounds like a TV show.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say, and it's kind of crude, but I like to say domestic violence got us together. It was someone else's domestic violence. It wasn't ours, but that's how we met. I was representing the defendant, and she was assisting the alleged victim of the crime. And that case dragged on for weeks, several appearances in court, but always got delayed for some reason or another. So we'd have numerous conversations with each other.
And how long before you started dating?
Well, she left. We never dated when she was in Maine. She left to go to England to get her master's in criminology, and that would have been, probably fall of 92. Yeah, fall of 92 maybe, or 91. She went to go get her master's, and I had never done the backpacking thing through Europe. And I had a lot of college classmates who, when they graduated, they went off to Europe for 3 weeks and backpacked, or law school, they went off and backpacked. I didn't do that. I always graduated and went to work. As I told you, in the high school, the day after I graduated, I was on the Turnpike working. So I decided when I was 31 years old that now's the time for me to do it, and I'm going to go to England and backpack. It was 21 days. And I knew she was there, so I started to write to her and said, I'm planning on being in England. Do you want to travel with me for a couple days? Well, a couple days turned into, of the 21 days, I think we traveled together for 18 of them. We started in England, took the ferry took a train from London to Portsmouth, took a ferry from Portsmouth to Cherbourg, France, spent time around Normandy, took a train to London, took a train to Berlin, took a train back to Luxembourg City, train to Brussels, a train to Amsterdam. We drove the entire country of the Netherlands, of Holland, and then she flew back to England to continue her master's, and I flew back to Maine. And then when she moved back to Maine, a couple of months later, we were engaged by Thanksgiving.
And you're still in practice with your father at this time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
But I had cleared my schedule, so I had no court cases, so I could go off. So my wife and I talk about how we never actually had a date. we
just came together.
We just sort of started traveling together, and that was it. And then we got engaged Thanksgiving of '93. So it would have been '92. I would have gone to Europe, and then we got married in '94.
At St. Brendan's at Biddeford Pool.
Yes.
And why there versus Lincoln, Nebraska?
Because she really liked the area here. She wanted to show Maine off to her family. St. Brendan's because it was the summer chapel to St. Mary's, which is the parish I belong to. So she was perfectly fine with having the ceremony here in Maine. So and her family did come out for it.
And
So
do you guys go back to Lincoln much?
yes, when our children were young, we would go out a couple times, probably twice a year, summertime, and then either Thanksgiving or Christmas. But what's interesting about Nebraska is their weather. If it's hot here, it's hotter there. If it's cold here, it's colder there. So later on, we stopped going over the holidays during Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was just too cold, and the children were getting a little older, and so we pretty much, it would be summer times that would go. My wife will still, I'll go once a year now. My wife will go out maybe 3 times a year now because, her father's passed away, but her mother, she goes out to visit with her mother. But yeah, we spend a lot of time out there. I joke with people and say most people from Maine go to Florida on vacation. We go to Lincoln, Nebraska.
And I'm going to come back to your family, but I don't think I ever asked you if your parents got married in Pennsylvania or in Biddeford.
My parents got married in Monongahela, Pennsylvania, and their wedding reception was at the William Penn, which was was at the time, and it's a hotel still there, the swanky hotel, the William Penn hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. And I went to a conference several years ago at the William Penn, and my conference was actually held in the ballroom where my parents had their wedding reception.
Well, that's neat.
Yeah, it was very neat.
Yeah. And is your wife working now, or?
Yes, my wife works as a tutor for a student with who's medically fragile with special needs, and then she also works. She's presently working as a substitute teacher in 2 school systems up in our area.
Wow.
Yeah.
And tell me about your children.
We have 3 children. They're all close in age. They're all, at this point in time, they're all 1 year apart. Their ages 26, 25, and 24. For 6 months out of the year, they're 1 year apart. Then the birthdays start happening. So a little different there. But the 26-year-old is a transitional kindergarten teacher in Los Angeles. That's our daughter, Margaret Catherine. Our son, Liam, is 25. He is a financial analyst for the Healthcare Purchaser Alliance of Maine, which is a nonprofit, and he lives in Biddeford, and he's married to Isha Khan. And then our youngest daughter is 24. That's Eleanor. She's an executive recruiter in Philadelphia.
How did your oldest daughter end up out in Los Angeles?
She did her undergraduate at Santa Clara University, which is a Jesuit school just south of San Francisco in the town of Santa Clara. And after that, she did a 2-year stint with Teach for America. And so she was teaching at a charter school, assigned to a charter school in Los Angeles. Now she's done her commitment with Teach for America, and she's working in a public school in Los Angeles. So she was out there for 4 years of college and decided to stay. Likewise, our youngest was at a school, Ursinus College, just outside of Philadelphia. She decided to stay in the Philadelphia area. And our son graduated from Gonzaga, which is in Spokane, Washington, but he decided to come back to Maine. And all 3 children went to high school at Cheverus High School, which is a Jesuit school, and 2 of them went on to Jesuit universities for their college education.
Why don't we move on to your political career? Can you talk about being on the Biddeford School Board, being a state senator, being a state rep, and especially if you can frame any of the, well, the school board will be easy because it is Biddeford, but frame it in terms of how serving in government impacted, how Biddeford influenced you in that capacity, and how maybe decisions you had to make influenced Biddeford.
Sure. I started my political career in running for the Biddeford School Board. I don't know if I told you what the years were, but it was probably, I was probably on the Biddeford School Board 91 and 92, or 92 and 93. I did one term. I started out as a member of the school board, and then due to a resignation by a vice chairperson, I became the vice chair of the school board. That was a good experience. We weren't having major funding problems, which was good. We had a very solid team of administrators, and we had a pretty good core group of school board members. And at that time, there were no building concerns. The new middle school hadn't been built yet. The middle school, which is now the elementary school, which is now the current elementary school was the new middle school. So we weren't looking to build anything at that time. But overall, I don't remember any issues of being really controversial. I think the only one that was this thing called Whittle Communications wanted to provide the city with provide the school system with a bunch of technology, TVs, cameras, and so forth, to put in the classrooms. The only catch was every day you had to show the Whittle Communication news program, which was probably a 10 or 15-minute news program, but it was full of advertising. And we thought, is that really a good trade-off to have to subject kids to watching commercials just to get all this free equipment? And we didn't see it as a benefit to the students. So we sort of shocked the administration on that was pushing for us to bring all this equipment in, but we just thought it was a cost we didn't want to pay. It wasn't really worth it. The news program we don't think was that beneficial to students, and certainly the commercials weren't. So that was probably the most controversial thing. But then I ran for the House of Representatives, and at that time it was District 19, which was the western part of Biddeford. So everything pretty much westerly of Elm Street, going out Main Street, South Street, up at 5 Points, it would then also deviate and go down part of West Street. So it was a big chunk of the city that I represented, and I had a 5-way primary, Democratic primary, and I was the highest vote getter, and I fortunately had no Republican opposition. So when I won the primary, essentially I was going to be the next state rep from Biddeford. The most controversial thing that took place during my tenure in the House, which I was one term in the House, was the bill that was introduced to allow Biddeford Pool to secede from the city of Biddeford. And I was pretty active in the fight against that bill. I was seeking to defeat the bill, and the bill was defeated there. And then again, we saw it 2 years later, which it was defeated again. I didn't think it was right that part of the city would be separated out, creating its own town.
I don't remember that. It's probably when I was away. Why did they want to succeed?
I think you'd have to ask some people who lived down there at the time, but I think their biggest concern was that they didn't feel that the city was devoting enough attention to what their needs were as far as probably maintaining roads and other public services. So that was sort of, I think the big reason. But I was in the House for one term, and then I got to the House because, and I can't remember the order of it, but the U.S. Senator at the time, which I think was probably Senator Mitchell, resigned, or wasn't seeking re-election. I can't remember which one. And it created the domino effect of people seeking to move up in higher office, and that opened up the House seat. So I ran for it. Now, 2 years later, I think it was either Senator Cohen or Senator Mitchell, I can't remember which one, they left, and it caused the domino effect. So our state senator at the time, John Hathaway, he decided to run for the U.S. Senate, which opened up the Senate seat. And in the Senate, I represented Biddeford, Arundel, Kennebunk, and Kennebunkport. And I was fortunate to get elected 4 times, only 4 times because we have term limits in Maine. So I was not able to run for a 5th term, which in my opinion was a good thing. Otherwise, I had other concerns. I had a family. The legislature doesn't pay a lot of money, and it does impact your law practice as far as ability to be able to manage it. So it's probably a good thing that I termed out, that couldn't run for re-election.
And did you, were you involved in legislation that, directly influenced Biddeford in any manner, and would that conflict with other parts of where you were representing, or in any way?
No, there was never anything that pitted like Biddeford against Kennebunk or anything of that nature. You had obviously the secession bills. Fortune's Rocks folks introduced a bill that was called annexation. They wanted to be annexed to Kennebunkport, not succeed and be their own community. They just wanted to be annexed and become part of Kennebunkport. So that was another one. But most of the bills I tended to involve myself with were ones that actually appeared before the committee I was on, which was, at that time, it was known as banking and insurance. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of healthcare related bills that came before my committee. One unique bill that I really remember sponsoring for a particular person was a woman from Biddeford who came to see me, and I did not know this history whatsoever. She said, I want to have a special license plate, a POW. And we all know POW license plates went to POW from the World Wars, Korea, Vietnam. But she said, I don't qualify for one under current law. And she told me her story. And her story was basically this. She, as a young child, was living in the Philippines with her family. Born and raised in Biddeford for the early part of her life. Father was from Biddeford. The father was employed by, I think, West Point Pepperell or West Point Stevens, or one of those mill manufacturers. And he was stationed in the Philippines. He was probably a buyer for some sort of the raw product that was used to make what they would make in the Biddeford mills. So she's living there during the early stages of World War II, when Japan invaded the Philippines, and her entire family was put into an internment camp. Sort of the same thing that the U.S. government did to people who are of Japanese descent on the West Coast during World War II. So her family was put in an internment camp, at which time, and later on in life, she suffered a lot of health consequences as a result. Lack of scurvy type things, lack of vitamins, for not getting the proper nutrition. So she said, I essentially was a prisoner of war. I was a civilian. I wasn't a member of the armed forces, but the way the current law is drafted, I don't qualify. So I introduced a bill to change the definition of who could qualify for a POW license plate. And she came and she testified at the hearing, as did another guy. And they had documentation to verify that, yes, they were interned in the Philippines during World War II. And the legislature passed the bill, so she did qualify for her POW license plate, which was really important to her because she felt like, I lived that experience. I should be able to get this recognition.
That's neat.
It was very, very neat. It was a very moving story. I had never heard it before.
Now, was your father ever politically active?
Yes, my father was. He was Judge of Probate for York County, and he was also the U.S. Attorney for the State of Maine or what was called the District of Maine. That's not an elected position. That's an appointment by the president. And at that time, President Johnson appointed him to serve as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Maine. But once Johnson didn't run for re-election and Nixon was elected, the expression is to the victor go the spoils. So President Nixon replaced my father with a Republican who actually served before my father did under the Eisenhower administration.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when you were on the school board, had the high school population started to decline yet? But you were in a big class, if I remember correctly.
I was in a class of about 12, a class of just over 300. I think the population of the high school was 1,200. And I don't remember it either increasing or decreasing at that time. It was a fairly steady 1,200.
Okay. And today it's, like
Somewhere
maybe 60% of it.
It's probably somewhere in the 800s now.
Yeah. Much smaller school.
Yeah, but it's interesting. When you look at Biddeford, it doesn't have, now certainly the mills are being developed into apartments, but I don't know if it's actually bringing in a lot of kids. And a lot of these housing developments were built when I was growing up. The street behind Mayfield, Avanthia Drive, those were sort of big subdivisions that all had 20, 30 homes, which, brought in families with 2 and 3 kids. But you haven't seen that large, and then you had Cathedral Oaks, but you haven't seen those large-scale developments since.
Well, and the families aren't as big as when we grew up either.
Right.
That'd be another factor, I would think.
I was thinking about that the other day. At St. Mary's alone, you had some families that had 7, 8, 9 kids growing up. I'm thinking of Dr. Hoole and his children. I'm thinking of Dr. Robert and his children. And there was one other that I thought about.
The Minuti family.
Oh, the Minuti family was quite large. Yes. So, you don't see those large families anymore. And those were just St. Mary's folks. I'm sure you could say the same is true of St. Joseph's and St. Andrew's families.
Yeah, it's different times. So normally we ask folks if they remember certain world or national events. But some of the events we asked about, you weren't even born or would not remember. But do you remember, were you in the Biddeford area during 9/11 when that happened?
Yes. Oh, small world. And I'll give you the name afterwards. But I dropped our 2001. So that would have been 2001. I dropped probably Liam off at preschool in Old Orchard. And I remember driving home, and that would have been around 9 o'clock in the morning. And I remember looking up at the sky saying, wow, what a beautiful day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. And then I went to my office, and my first client came in probably around 10 o'clock. And I'll tell you who it is afterwards, after we're off the recording. And she said, did you hear what happened? And I said, no. And she told me what had happened, the events at the World Trade Center. So I was in my law practice, and it was a client that informed me about what just had occurred. So as soon as she left, I turned the TV on at the office to sort of get coverage on it. So I was in Biddeford at the time. And I remember, the other event I remember is I was in law school, probably in my second year, in the month of January. We took our semester exams in January and in May. So the first semester exam was January. I came out of my exam, and the first thing I heard is the space shuttle blowing up. So I remember that.
1986.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now the Kennedy death, I don't remember. I would have been under the age of 2.
Yeah. Did your parents ever talk about that? The Kennedy assassination.
I don't remember in great detail. I do know that my father had played a pickup football game with Kennedy prior to his becoming president at one time when they were down in the Washington area. My father went to both Georgetown undergrad and Georgetown Law School, so somewhere along the way he was involved in some sort of pickup football game with Kennedy. I don't really have many more details from that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So what has being from Biddeford meant to you?
Well, it's a place where I grew up and have roots, and I think it was a fine place to live. The only reason I don't live here now is because of my work. For years, I traveled 75 miles each way to and from work to work in the Augusta area. So finally, we came to a point where our children had grown, were out of the home, the house was too big. We decided to move north, so I live just outside of Augusta. But I think it was a great place to live. It was a very safe place. You played outside. You rode your bike everywhere. I went to school with a great group of people. And what's interesting is I look at my core group of friends, and my core group of friends is really, it's my high school friends. It's not my college friends. And one of those reasons why is because going to Holy Cross in Worcester, Mass, a lot of my classmates then left to go to Boston, Washington, New York City, Chicago. No one came back to Maine. I was the only one. So I didn't have that group of friends coming that were close to me. But a lot of my high school friends had also at one point left after college. But a lot of them filtered back in their mid to late 40s back to the Biddeford area, and most of them are now back here. So it's a great place to live where we have the beach, we're 90 minutes from Boston, we're an hour from the ski slopes, an hour and a half from the ski slopes of North Conway and the White Mountains. So the proximity to everything that you want to do is great. And I think people here in the Biddeford area, the group that I grew up with, all had really good core values and made it a wonderful place to live.
Are there any stories that we haven't talked about that stick with you from growing up in Biddeford?
You might need to be more specific on that one.
High school stories or junior high stories or things that happened at the Mayfield or skating, anything like that?
Well, I actually met your sister at Mayfield when I was in third grade.
Really?
Yes, we met. Your sister went to school at St. Mary's. I went to school at that time at Kennedy School. And in the evening, I'd go to Mayfield, and I met your sister with one of her friends. And I really don't recall having any meetings again, or meeting up with your sister again until we hit high school. But it was like we knew each other from our childhood and sort of just really kind of hit it off. So she's been really a lifelong friend in a way. Yeah.
Mayfield was like that. You meet a lot of kids from all over.
Yeah, it really was. But that was a good experience. But what was the question again?
Are there any stories? Any interesting stories? Like, you had a couple of good turnpike ones, but just things that stick out with you.
I'm sure I'll think of things.
From downtown Biddeford or high school days, because usually where most of these things kind of happen.
Yeah.
Did you guys do? Did they still have dances?
Yeah, they had dances in high school. That we probably had maybe 7 or 8 a year. But I do remember the middle school. The junior high dances. We'd have a couple of those per year, and then after the dance, your parents didn't pick you up at the dance. The parents picked you up at Alex Pizza, because everyone would migrate from the dance down to Alex Pizza to get a pizza. Which, how much do you think a pizza cost in 1975 and 6?
$1.50.
90 cents. And if you wanted something on it, it was $1.10. That's outrageous. It cost 90 cents for a pizza. And we all know that the Alex Pizza is not your traditional pizza. It's a lot smaller, but 90 cents. And I think a drink cost you 25 cents. And then later on, when I worked at Bill's Pizza, my first year, a slice would cost you 60 cents. And the second year, it went up, and I thought it was outrageous. It went up to 65 cents. It's like they raised it 5 cents. But yeah, that's one of my memories, is we would all sort of walk down, have your pizza, and then your parents would stop picking you up.
Yeah, so when I said Saturday night dances, they didn't have them at St. John's Hall anymore. That by then they had stopped. Do you know where St. John's Hall is? Up above where Doran's drugstore was?
Oh, no.
Carmel.
No, I have never...
The Bergeron family, did you know them? Rudy Bergeron. He managed the Central Theater, and he and his wife ran dances there and down in the watch it during the summer.
This is above Doran's Pharmacy.
Yeah.
No, I've never
they
been...
Don't have those anymore.
No, I've never been upstairs in that building, but I have told my son, because he'll point out some of the buildings in Biddeford. I'll say, from what I understand, a lot of these buildings upstairs have these large rooms with either stages or they were social halls. But I do remember as a child on Union Street, our babysitters were 2 of the Dumont sisters. You might have gone to school with one of the Dumonts.
No, that's not ringing a bell with me.
But they lived on Graham Street, and they went to. Did the girls go to what was called St. Louis, or were they St. Joseph's School?
It was St. Joseph's until I think 1967. Then it was formerly St. Louis Regional High School. Or something
Okay,
like that.
so they went to school with
Yeah.
one or the other one. But I remember we would go down to the parish hall for St. Joseph's, which is called what? Just parish hall?
Yeah, now it belongs to St. James School now.
Right.
Yeah.
But we would go there in the springtime, and we would watch all the students get driven up and get out of their cars to go into prom. And we would all, it was like going to a red carpet event. You would all stand outside and the applause for people. And it was, I was watching our babysitters go in for
And,
their
uh,
prom.
They recruited juniors to park the cars
Ah.
by the high school
Yeah.
and then bring the keys back.
Yeah. One of the babysitters was Jermaine Dumont, and her sister, and I cannot remember her first name. But yeah, we went to watch them go in for their senior prom.
Yeah.
Did you have yours there?
Yeah.
And was your family out there
I was
applauding?
a class of 68, so just, it closed 2 years afterwards.
And were your mom and dad there to applaud as you drove?
No, I don't think so. I think we did pictures at the house,
Oh.
but there were always a lot of people that lived around there that would be there
Yeah.
when it was
It
happening.
was a Hollywood event.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have that memory of my childhood.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but that hall, when St. Louis was open, had the student council sponsored Saturday night dances, and then the Bergerons put one on at St. John. So there were 2 dance halls in Biddeford for high school kids back in the 50s and 60s.
yeah, though St. John's
Yeah.
was not an active
Yeah.
place when I was in high school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so those were different. Who influenced you in Biddeford? Who were some positive influences on you growing up in Biddeford?
I would say my grandmother, number one, as I told you about her past. I mean, she was sort of a pioneer when it came to, getting her post-high school education, her dental practice. And then for some unknown reason, when she was in her late 50s or early 60s, she decided while maintaining her law practice that she would build a motel in Scarborough at Pine Point. So she built this probably 7 or 8 unit long building that were motel rooms, and then there were 4 or 5 small cottages, and so she would run a motel while maintaining her dental practice, which was kind of unique. The family sort of resented it because, like today, it's really hard to get help, and on any Saturday when a housekeeper would call in sick, my grandmother would pick up the phone and call my mother and her own daughter, my Aunt Betty, to come down and can you help clean? So down they would go. So I think the family, no one in the family was interested in buying it when my grandmother decided to sell it, because they really knew how labor intensive it can be, and it's the type of business that you need to be there. You just don't lock the door on Friday night and you're off for the weekend.
Is that building still on that property, or?
No, it was torn down probably 10 years ago, and now there are, I think, 5 homes on the property. It was on East Grand Avenue, not the ocean side, but before you get to, probably halfway between where Pine Point starts and when you get to where the clam bake is. So it was along that stretch, but not on the ocean side. So I'd say my grandmother was a big influence, and she told me the value of getting the proper education. She also gave me a word of advice, and I never really followed it. But my grandmother was from an Irish family, and so only way she learned French was to play with kids who were French speaking, and there were a lot of kids that were French speaking when she was growing up. So she would encourage me to. I had a few friends who spoke both French and English when I was really young, and she said, you need to learn French from them because that's where you get to learn it. But I didn't really pick it up through my friends, which was unfortunate.
But you said in the form you filled out for us that you understand French a little bit?
I can understand French for the most part if you are talking about something in the present tense and it's going on around us. But if you start talking about your great aunt and what happened in 1924, and I'm not going to understand you. But if it's in the surroundings, I can sort of get the buzzwords. I do remember when on my trip to Europe with my now wife Tricia, I developed a head cold as I left England on the ferry. And when I got to Cherbourg, France, I went into a pharmacy, and I could not think of the word. And I said, "Qu'est-ce que c'est le mot? What is the word? Pour. Qu'est-ce que c'est le mot pour?" And then I pointed to my nose. And then she said, "Le nez." And I thought, oh, yeah, Alouette. Remember the song, Alouette, Alané? Yeah, it's like Alané. I couldn't remember the word nose. But then she pointed me to something that would help clear up my sinuses. So,
Any other people, teacher or anybody from Biddeford that was a major influence on you?
I had, I was thinking of this question before I came here, and I had three really great teachers. I had several really good teachers, but three that really stand out. At the elementary level, it would have been fifth grade. It would have been Elizabeth Long. Miss Long, I had her for homeroom, and she was an English teacher, and she also introduced us to the Spanish language. So she was a very good teacher. And then in junior high, I'd say Nancy Ginnard, who was my seventh grade homeroom English and for 1 quarter reading teacher. And then in high school, it would be Monsieur Carrier, Joseph Carrier, who was a French teacher who I think probably was at St. Louis and came to Biddeford when the schools merged, but maybe not. Maybe he was at Biddeford beforehand. But he ran a class that, a very strict class, that really prepared you for college and the way you might be treated in college. There was an expectation when an assignment is due, it's due. There's none of this kind of extra time, kind of extra credit. I mean, it was fairly strict. And he also hosted a trip to France for students that were interested. And so I went to France with about 15 of my classmates who had all taken a couple of years of French. And what was interesting is we just didn't get on a plane and go to France and see everything. It was Paris, but we had to take extra classes after school to learn about French art, French culture, French foods, French music, and so forth. So he didn't want us just to walk into a museum and say, "Oh, great painting." He wanted us to be able to look at something and say, "Oh, I know the style that was used by this artist, who the artist is, what were his influences." So it wasn't just a sightseeing tour through the museums of Paris. We actually went in knowing what we were going to be looking at and could look at it in a critical manner. And one thing that he did was great is he taught us the metro system of Paris before we went, because several of us got lost when people turned right and we went left, and then we had to find our way back. So we were able to read the metro map, which was unique for us because we don't drive. We're not riding on metros here in York County.
Yeah. And who was the third person?
He was the third. So it was
Was he
Elizabeth
the
Long, Nancy Ginnard,
Okay.
and then
Yep.
Mr. Carrier.
Yep.
And what was so that was a great experience.
So what's it like to be at this phase of your life now?
Well, I'm currently a superintendent of the Bureau of Financial Institutions. I'm going on 18 years now. I got appointed in 2005. It's their 5-year terms. So I was appointed by Governor Baldacci. In 2010, I was reappointed by him. 2015, reappointed by Governor LePage, and most recently reappointed by Governor Mills. So, retirement might be a few years down the road. My wife and I have talks about that and what's, what our plan is, but we don't really have any definitive answers as of yet.
And can you concisely summarize what your job is?
I regulate state-chartered banks and state-chartered credit unions. It used to be really easy to tell which were state-chartered banks and credit unions because of the name. Most national banks or federal credit unions had the word national in it or federal, but now they don't. So, for instance, in the Biddeford-Saco area, banks that I would regulate are Biddeford Savings, Saco Biddeford Savings Institution. Let's see, what else would there be? There's Norway Savings, Bangor Savings. Credit unions would be People's Choice, Saco Valley. Those are all state-chartered organizations. So I have a staff of about 18 individuals, of which 10 of them are examiners. They'll go into these institutions once every 18 months or once every 3 years, depending upon the type of institution, to examine it for safety and soundness purposes, and to examine it for compliance with federal and state law. And then we also assist consumers that might have problems that have developed with their institution. So we assist them and work with the banks to try to remedy the situation if there truly is one. Oftentimes it may be a consumer just misunderstanding the terms of their product that they're involved in, whether it be a mortgage or a savings account or CD. So we provide assistance, and we regulate for safety and soundness.
And do you have to travel much for this job?
I travel primarily for board meetings. So we have banks that are headquartered as far south as Kennebunk and Sanford, and as far north as Holton, and as far east as Calais and Machias, and as far west as Norway and Farmington. So I do travel throughout the state to attend board meetings. I also attend national conferences for both regulators of credit unions and regulators of banks. So.
And has your life turned out to be what you thought it would be back when you were a younger person?
Yeah, I always thought I would be a lawyer. I was primarily always asked two questions when I was young, like, will you have a Lloyd IV? And the answer is no, we did not have a Lloyd IV. And then the other one was, are you going to be a lawyer? And I did become a lawyer. So I did sort of anticipate that. I never really saw the jump to what I'm doing now. That pretty much came out of the blue as a result of a call from Governor Baldarchi's office to say, are you interested in seeking this position? And it was a competitive process, but I did express an interest and got it.
Well, now that you've been away from Biddeford for a while, so you talk to people about Biddeford. What's the perception of Biddeford, at least in the circle that you travel in now?
I think everyone sees it really as an up-and-coming place, whether you're still here now. And I've only been gone since December of 2019. Oh, that's when we sold our house. And from people who still live here and people who live elsewhere are all saying, it's pretty much up and coming and things are really traveling in the right direction.
And is there something you'd want to make sure people take away from hearing your story?
Let's see. I think it doesn't really matter where you live. It's what you can give to it and what you can get out of it. So the benefit is really active engagement in your community. And I think I did that. And I think, my wife did it. She was on the board of the MacArthur Library. I think our children did it through some of their volunteering work that they did. So that really sort of makes the community. And it's interesting with our children, they all went off to Cheverus High School, but their core group of friends, they have their college friends, but their other core group of friends are friends that they went to either St. James or through the Biddeford Public School System in the middle school. That's sort of the group that they still have the most contact with.
Yeah, I didn't ask you this, but was that a hard decision, putting them into private school versus having them, stay in Biddeford and go through public school?
No, I mean, I attended Holy Cross, which is a Jesuit institution, and sort of the motto of the Jesuits is service for others. And Cheverus offered a great experience for the children with various volunteering activities, and they do this program during the last 2 months of the senior year where the students actually go out and intern in a nonprofit organization. Classes are over pretty much in mid-April, and they're off working out in the field in a nonprofit providing service. So I thought it was sort of a good decision at the time.
Anything else you'd like to share that I didn't ask you about?
Well, I'll think of that later as I'm driving home or tonight at 2 a.m, so I'll make sure to give you a call at that time.
We'll add it to the script.
Yeah.
So I can't thank you enough for participating in the Voices of Biddeford program.
Oh, you're welcome.